with the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Coming up, we'll have half an hour of business news and analysis. On today's show, we'll take a closer look at the current state of international trade and what is China's role in it. Elon Musk says Tesla will start using humanoid robots next year. So what does this mean for EV sector competition? And now let's begin with our top story. The cost of shipping goods around the world has more than doubled since April in the wake of Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. It will now cost you almost $10,000 to send a 40-foot container from Shanghai to New York. Meanwhile, China's seaborne container shipments to the U.S. jumped 15% year-on-year by volume in June, showing resilient supply and demand between the world's two largest economies. So what is the current state of international trade, and what is China's role in it? For more on this, join us on the line now are Wang Dan, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank China, Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. So Yan, I will start with you. So there are a couple of factors affecting the shipping costs. So what are they, and what is the importance of the Red Sea in the global trade?
Right. So one of the negative factors has to do with Houthis' attack at the Red Sea, as you just mentioned. And since the attack, we have seen that the container ships arrived at the Gulf of Aden has been down by 90% over the current period compared to the same period last year before the attack. So now the rerouting of the ships around the Horn of Africa due to the Red Sea issues have now accounted for 17% of the global container shipping capacity. So that creates a lot of jam, and also the reroute itself added somewhere between 9 to 14 days to the voyage time, which added fuel, staff, and insurance costs. So all of these would increase the container ships, as you just mentioned. But adding to this Red Sea issue, there are also a number of other negative factors. For example, the low-level water in the Panama Canal also created some difficulties with, ships could not go beyond the so-called draft, which means they cannot load as many cargo as they used to in the past. There's also the unusual rush to build inventories ahead of the holiday seasons this year. And on top of that, we also seen other attacks, for example, the pirate attacks of Somalia, which is, on the Africa's east coast. So there's so many, numbers of concerns and potential risks. So I think all of these in some ways affected the global shipping, and it increased the cost. And part of the reason is because of the higher costs and risks. But also, I think shipping companies could also take advantage of, the high demand for container ships and also these negative factors to charge even more to compensate, for the cost and potential risks.
And Dr. Zhou, so the cost of shipping goods worldwide has more than doubled since April in the wake of the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. So no one really knows how long this disruption could last. But the reality is that the longer the crisis continues, the more significant the impact. So how will this impact the global trade?
Yes, for the global trade, we know that it depends on the many factors. According to analysis by the economists, the demand side, when we're talking about United States market, it's still very strong. And when we're talking about Europe market, they're not that strong. And for the supply side, I would say that many of these countries are trying to industrialize their economies. They are making more products, which provide so many support for the capacities and trying to meet the demand of those markets. Well, for the logistics, I think that many of these companies are trying to do more to discover whether it is possible to use alternative ways, like for the land, by the train or by the trunks, to ship some of these products. But that is maybe not enough for the the mass, I mean the energies, the gas, and a lot of those products which are depending on the ship, on the on the ocean. So I will say that when we're talking about the global trade, they are talking about how can they meet the demand that is already there, while they are still trying to find some new ways. Like for some of the containers, they are putting the NEVs, the new energy vehicles, in the containers to trying to make it safer and easier to transfer from one continent to another. So the global trade are still under pressure, and I believe that those companies can try to find out their own ways to deal with the changes.
So then, so what do you think is the outlook for the global trade this and the coming year?
Actually, the outlook for global trade this year is quite rosy. The main reason is that major Western central banks, mostly in Europe, has been reducing their interest rate, and that would stimulate domestic consumption, investment, particularly in housing, and those would translate into Chinese exports. And it's not just the decoration materials, industrial inputs, but also the labor protection gears and other necessary inputs for financing their domestic infrastructure and housing construction. And next year, with the US very likely lowering their interest rate, the global trade is also facing probably a quite promising future. The only bottleneck now is exactly what we have talked about. It is the shipping cost. Because with this situation going on in the Red Sea, sailing from a major port in China, like Shanghai, for example, to Europe, would take an extra 10 days when you try to avoid the Suez. And these delays not only create a knock-on effect for supply chain, but also lead to bottleneck for ports. So the longer we have to get involved in this kind of chaos situation in Red Sea, the more shipping costs will be in the future, and that would drive up the inflation in Western countries.
And Dr. Zhou, so China's container shipping volume to the U.S. jumped 15% last month. So what does it tell us, and what's China's role in the global trade?
Yeah, actually, China is one of the main providers of many of the products, including the manufacturing products, the vehicles, and also some of the electronic machineries. So I mean, that is one of the main provider of those products. If you are looking at the structure of the exports, the HS code, I mean, the 94 and also many of the other manufacturing products, China have many advantages over there. Well, for Europe, it's really a kind of a combination of the demand. If you are looking at certain kind of sectors like the automobiles and some of the machineries, they are very strong, but they still need a lot of input. I mean, for the intermediate products, which they have depended a lot from China. And actually, they are also importing some of the consumption products from China. So I would say that China is one of the main provider of many of the products to Europe, and they are trying to benefit from that. And when we're talking about that, I think that the United States is also trying to catch up with manufacturing, but it's still not that strong enough to provide those materials and the intermediate products that Europe needs.
And Dr. Zhou, so opening up is a defining feature of Chinese modernization. So how do you view China's experience of opening up and its impact on the Chinese and the world economy?
Opening up is one of our main policies. I think that is one way that China has adopted ourselves to the world. When we're talking about the experiences, I would say that China is trying to have a very unique and special ways of dealing with opening up. Like we started from certain provinces or certain districts to open up earlier and trying to do some experiments. And when are going to find out whether we are suitable for opening these sectors or not. So we are getting some of the pressure test, like for the risk test, and trying to be better adapted to this. And another way that China has experienced is we are trying to deal with the opening up by the rule-based systems. So we joined WTO, we abide by our commitments in WTO, and we also signed a lot of agreements, I mean free trade agreements and bilateral investment treaties with many of our partners. So we based on these rules, and we are also training a lot of enterprises to let them know what the rules are. So we are trying to provide a better and very stable policies to deal with the situation and make our partners also believe believe that we are doing the things on the right track. So another way is that we are having more, opening up on the innovative sectors. So we're giving many of the support to the enterprises, to the private sectors, and also the foreign investors. They can come here to benefit by the strong supply chains networks, and it's really good for them to explore more room.
So yeah, regarding the world economy, we've heard much about supply chain issues. So is it still one of the main potential risks for the global economy this year?
Well, I do think the supply chain could be an issue. Part of the reason, as you just mentioned, has to do with this complexity in terms of global shipping and global, sort of production. And I agree with Wang Dan. So this year, the WTO does estimate that the trade is going to grow by 2.3% this year, higher than the estimated 1.7% last year. That said, as we just mentioned, there are also other issues. For example, this global shipping cost is going to add to maybe inflationary pressure, depending on whose estimates. According to Nomura, the shipping cost is going to add another 0.3 to 0.4 percentage points to UK and Eurozone's inflation by the end of 2025. So if that's the case, that's rather significant. But also others disagree. They think that this inflationary pressure would be relatively moderated because manufacturers will not be able to pass the cost on. So they will simply tolerate some of the thinning of the profit margins instead of raising prices. But whatever the case might be, I think the global supply chain is still relatively fragile, not only because of these complexities on the sea, but also I think has a lot to do with geopolitical tensions and also protectionist trade policies. As we know, according to the WTO, now the protectionary measures by countries have increased, 3 times. Actually, it's 3 times the level as before the pandemic. So with the lifting of with the increasing trade protection, I think that countries would also trying to take measures to reshore, to nearshore, to friendshore. So all of these, I think, would complicate the global supply chain. And so as a result of that, I think there are some compromises on efficiency. There are also some elevated costs on the supply side. And I think, all these are very, I think, concerning trends. So I think, even though we're likely to see more trade, but I think some of these trades is simply, for example, distorted. So in other words, China has to ship the products to a third country to be rerouted to the Western, Europe or the US. So I think, yes, despite the fact that we might see trade increases, that doesn't necessarily mean that supply chain is being, more streamlined, more efficient, or, being more open to the kinds of open, competitive environment.
So then how do you view the inflation issues in the US and Europe? And what do you expect for the US Federal Reserve and the ECB's monetary policy for the second half of this year?
The inflation pressure in the US seemed to recede a bit, but the wage inflation pressure is still there, and that's the main concern. And the Federal Reserve kept talking about a possibility of cutting rates within this year, but actually the market believe it may or may not happen, precisely because there's no habit for American consumers to save more. If they have a wage inflation or wage increase by about 15 to 20% a year, of course they will spend most of that money. And if the Federal Reserve cut interest rate, that can drive up inflation very quickly. But for Europe, it's a completely different situation. Many countries have contained their inflationary pressure, and that's why we have seen that ECB is in this cutting rate cycle already. In London, the inflation pressure is quite high. For the rest of the UK, the situation is quite uneven. But in any case, I don't think it will go away anytime soon, given that probably most of the central banks in the world next year will have to cut rate one way or another. Maybe depending on where they are, the pace will be different. And that also means the ability for China to produce enough goods for the rest of the world would be a stabilizing factor actually to contain the inflation.
So what do you expect for the U.S. Federal Reserve and the ECB's monetary policy? And what do you think is the chance of a global economic soft landing for this and the coming years?
Right. So I agree with Wang Dan. I think most of the economists would estimate that, the Fed is either would cut one rate or not at all this year. I think, the US economy is relatively unusual at this point. One of the reasons has to do with the very expensive expansionary fiscal policy. The US right now, the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is around 6%. And this is quite unusual during a non-recessionary year. So this rather expansionary fiscal policy has really helped to bolster the economy. And on top of that, yes, there's some stickiness in the inflation, especially now in the service sector, that we're starting to see a little bit, slow down in the disinflationary trend. So I think that means the Fed is not necessarily or is not rushed to cut the rates this year at least. Now for ECB and I think England, I think they have different scenario. They have different situations to deal with. They have much tighter fiscal policies. Their economy is much less, growing compared to the United States. So I think they are facing a bit more pressure to cut rates. I think Japan, their currency depreciation situation would also prompt them to think twice about cutting rates anytime soon. So I think in a very interesting sense, we see the divergence between the US's monetary policy compared to the rest of the world. That said, I think the rest of the world will look very closely to Fed's movements because that really affect their, exchange rate dynamics and also their trade performances, their capital flows dynamics. So they would also be very careful when it comes to rate cuts. I think overall, though, given now that the inflationary pressure has been relatively eased, I'm hoping that the Fed will start cut the rates sooner because I think this policy of keeping rates higher for longer, on the one hand, could really affect the U.S.'s households' balance sheets and also some fragile sectors like the commercial real estate. And also, I think it's not conducive to the long-term investments in, for example, green energies and other long-term investments. So I could see a lot of negative factors of, keeping rates higher for longer. And I'm not seeing this is helping the inflation to a great extent.
Well, we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, Wang Dan, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank China, and Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. And after a short break, Elon Musk says Tesla will start using humanoid robots next year. Stay with us.
Welcome. I'm Elaf Ellard, economics professor and member of the Data Science and AI Center at New York University, Shanghai. On the World Today program, you can find in-depth and impartial insight, as well as critical commentary on key trends in the Chinese economy, financial technology, business, and blockchain. To prepare for the world tomorrow, join me on World Today.
You're listening to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Tesla CEO Elon Musk says the electric car maker will start producing and using humanoid robots from next year. In a social media post, Elon Musk said Tesla will first use the robots and then starting making them for sale in the year 2026. Other firms, including Honda and Boston Dynamics, have also been developing their humanoid robots. So I will start with you. So Elon Musk says Tesla will start producing and using humanoid robots from next year. How do you see this move?
Right. I think this is quite expected, but also I think just to put the context to this announcement, the second quarter of Tesla's revenue has gone up by 2%, but its profit was halved. So I think cost cutting now becomes the main concern for Elon Musk. So this idea of using humanoid robots, which is so-called Optimus Generation 2, using these robots could help to cutting costs and also help to increase production capacity. So I think this is one move that Elon Musk is really trying to bolster the expectations and also the profits of Tesla. He also made an announcement that these new humanoid robots were first employed by Tesla but will soon be sold to other companies by 2026. So this timeline, I think, would be really helpful to Tesla. But at the same time, we know that Elon Musk was not always on time when it comes to deliver his promise. For example, in 2019, he announced that he will put autonomous driving taxi on the streets by the following year. But this has not materialized as of 2024. So it's not exactly sure if the timeline of utilizing humanoid robots will be really fleshed out according to his timeline. I'm not a professional robotics expert, but I've seen some of the videos of the Optimus, and also I have looked into the prototypes of Optimus. I think this humanoids robots can really perform the functions of making cars, as Elon Musk would like it to be. However, I think despite that, technologically wise, it is sufficient. The question is if Elon Musk is able to produce this on a large scale and also at a cost that is desirable. The goal of selling those humanoids robots at $20,000 a piece, I think it is a challenge. So I think it remains to be seen if this announcement will be able to materialize as the timeline, which is next year.
So Tesla wants robots to help produce its cars more efficiently, but can they be more competitive than other EV makers by using these humanoid robots?
Maybe or maybe not, because I have been a big fan of Musk for years, and he went back and forth on his attitudes towards using robots for industrial production. Because for the first factory of Tesla in the US, he was trying to go all automation from the very beginning. It's not just the humanoid robots because the technology was not there. He was trying to use more industrial arms, more automated solutions. But quickly he found out that actually humans were cheaper, much cheaper. So he kind of rolled back on automation to contain the cost. But now is about 20 years later. The technology on his company for those humanoids robots is much better than before. And he has come up with a new vision that every factory will have this newly built generation of robots in the future, and they will become commonplace. And I trust at some point this will be a revolutionary change in the industry. But at this point, as Yan has pointed out, the cost is a real concern. I don't think other companies could really afford it in the coming years.
So Dr. Zhou, so what do you think? Can this actually change the EV sector competition?
So we can find that many of the robots have been used widely in the factories, but it doesn't have to be like the human. So for the people who are using these human-like robots, I think that most of these scenarios, in my imagination, would be in the houses to help the elders or senior persons or help the children and baby because they are looking friendly. So to be honest, I would say that maybe it's not that efficient as Elon may think the human-like robots can bring the efficiency improved. So we are trying to discover more scenarios. Maybe in the future, when they are trying to make a better, environment to use these robots, they have a better, kind of scenarios like for the different kind of research and development or some of the experiment, and that would be helpful.
And then, so how do you view Elon Musk's vision? He actually founded Tesla, and then he acquired Twitter and then changed his name to X, and he also launched the company SpaceX. So tell us, what is in his mind? What has driven him to do so?
He first started with the rockets, actually the SpaceX. And then the next few steps, he wanted the Neuralink, as well as Starlink. These are all part of the solution for him to fund the effort to go to Mars. For him, it is not just a business ambition, because he believes the Earth doesn't have enough resources to sustain humanity for the millions of years to come. So we have to use other universes to actually finance and sustain the development in the future. So I think his vision so far has not even get us closer to anywhere further than the moon, but along the way he has achieved many big business miracles, and there are even more to come. So it is truly a good example of how entrepreneurs should operate in the modern world.
So actually he has focused on technologies such as artificial intelligence, autonomous driving, and robots. So how would you describe him, and what has driven him to do so, do you think?
Right. So I agree. I think Elon Musk is a really visionary entrepreneur. I think some of the breakthroughs under his leadership is really, I was remarkable for the human race. I'm particularly impressed by the Starship, which was actually successfully tested just last month, and this time include a soft landing and an intact receivership, which is completely different than what has happened last year in November. Or September, when the Starship came back, but really had a hard crash in the ocean. So this is a very powerful spaceship, and I think if anything that would get us really close to send humans to Mars, will be the one. And NASA has been in partnership with SpaceX to try to develop the Starships. So I think this is quite remarkable. And the Neuralink is one of the company that Elon Musk leads, which I think we haven't talked much about, but it is a relatively small company valued at $5 billion last year. But I think it also made really breakthroughs and remarkable progress in building or implanting the brain chip into real human. The patient that has received this, he was basically paralyzed in all four limbs. But using this implant, he was able to connect with computer and also, move the mouse. So I think this is really remarkable. And, this patient has said this device has really changed his lives. Although there are some technical problems right now, I think this computer chip that is implanted now started to retract a little bit from the brain of this patient. So there's still a way to go to improve it. But that said, I think these three major technologies, including the EVs, the Starships, and also the implant chip brains, I think all these are really remarkable breakthroughs in technologies under Elon Musk's leadership.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, Wang Dan, Chief Economist of Hang Seng Bank China, and also Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.